Yeah, because I would like your advice, from a brother's point of view. Okay, so this is what I was going to do. I was going to fill you in on a few things. I already told you about the recordings. The video is not going to be made public. We're going to do excerpts of the audio, and that it's not a podcast. Yes, we want you to feel comfortable. Okay, so yeah, so this is like a conversation. It is about research and development and the exploration and investigation of the field and what others have experienced personally and professionally. But it's also like an exploration and experimentation in the imagination, right? Like, because we're talking about the future, because we're talking about what could be, we're trying to flex our imagination a little bit and kind of lean into the speculative, and even thinking about some tools that might even be used with Afrofuturism, and thinking about the what if, because we're trying to imagine, the village has been around for 30 years, and you can understand, as long as Bro Sis has been around, what it was like, if you can imagine like 25, 30 years ago, when things were just beginning for you. And then, now with this new building, I mean, the future is long. I mean, there's a lot in the distance that could unfold. And so thinking about the fact that we really don't know what the future holds, and there's so many factors that inform that future, from climate change to politics to cultural and social, all these things. So we want to kind of think about that speculative aspect of the what if, and kind of exploring, those sci-fi devices. But anyway, in addition to that, I think I mentioned that the Futures Gallery is merely like a working title for this. And it's probably not a sufficient word to contain all that we hope this project will be for the community. And with this in mind, when you respond to the questions, I want you to think about that, you don't have to think about it in this box of like, oh, what would I think would be good for a space like this as a gallery? But like I said, this is like a community gathering space. It could be a healing space and all the above. And so we want to make sure that we don't restrict folks in their thinking about this just by calling it a gallery alone. What else? So yeah, I will say that you are my, how many people have I done? I am rounding up. I started sometime after the new year. You are number 7. You're the 7th person I've interviewed. Yeah. And you are the first person that I've interviewed that is not like directly connected to the arts, if you know what I mean. Everyone else has been like a curator, or like their profession is in the art field, right? And we're wanting to interview more folks like yourself who have experience in community building, community programming, youth development, right? Intergenerational programming, but also this idea of the experience you just had, not just with this building, but you had the building before on, what street was it on? Over by Teachers College.
43rd.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, well, this building is actually in the space of the old building. We actually tore the old building down to build this one.
No way.
Yeah.
No, see, you know what? Because I walked by there and it looks completely different. Like that whole neighborhood looks different. You know what I mean? Like, and so I didn't recognize that as the place where, and now that you're telling me that, that's kind of mind blowing. That is the, so you toured the old brown, it was a brownstone, right?
Yes, it was.
Right,
so
that came down.
And we owned the empty lot next door.
And the empty lot.
And we always had a vision of expanding into the empty lot. And we looked at the possibility of kind of constructing a building above and around the brownstone so that we could actually preserve the brownstone, but just cost-wise, it was impossible to do, and we wouldn't have been able to have the kind of wide spaces that we need to have for programming. So in the end, taking it down was the only option. But one of the beautiful things is that we were able to preserve a lot of the brickwork. And so when you walk through the building now, on every floor, you see the bricks, the actual bricks from the brownstone, and aspects of the facade that are kind of baked into the new building. So part of it is still with us.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful. That's exciting. That's really exciting stuff. Okay, well, that's even more thrilling because for some reason I felt like, and again, I hadn't been in New York in a while, but it just like, because they even did, it seems like they did some, I guess, placemaking or whatever you want to call that they're calling it these days in terms of the area across the street. It's almost like a concrete park, or it feels like walking paths or something like that. Does that sound familiar, or maybe my memory's failing me?
Um, well, I mean, next door to our building is a 3 lot, 6,000 square foot community garden. And there's some pathways there, if that's what you're referring to. But across the street are residential buildings. So I'm not,
Well, maybe I meant like in the median in the middle of the road. I felt like there might be benches and things of that nature. But either way, the idea of access, right? I mean, that's kind of one of the questions we're going to talk about in a bit. So we can save that for later. But let's just
hmm.
start then, like with the warm up, like I mentioned. Yes, you're the seventh interviewee. And some of the warm-up questions, like I said, were about folks who were directly connected to the art world.
Hmm.
So I am going to adjust those questions a bit. And really, one question I could ask you, though, is about what your last art experience was like in an art space in real life, like not virtually, but maybe during the pandemic or before that. Do you recall entering into any, whether it's at a gallery, museum, and what that experience
Sure,
was like?
sure. Yeah, I was just at the Brooklyn Museum last weekend. Went to see the Andy Warhol exhibit they have there now, which is an interesting kind of retrospect on his relationship to Catholicism, something that doesn't often get talked about in terms of his life. Um, so I was able to see that exhibit, and then they had a couple other exhibits that were really interesting. One was on kind of COVID in general, and it was a very interactive exhibit. Essentially, there's an artist who has created this website where anyone who's lost someone during the time of COVID can submit a picture to this website and give some information about their loved one. And then he's created this kind of machine that creates an image, recreates that image with sand.
Oh,
So like
wow.
using sand droplets that just kind of create the image, and then they
Wow.
take a picture of that image, and that picture is sent to you. So you have this image of your loved one in sand, and then the sand image just gets turned. So all the sand just falls back into the pool of sand, and the next image gets made. But these
Ah,
pictures are then, there's a room full of them in the museum. And
that's
obviously it
really
speaks to the pain that people have suffered during this period of time, but also, to all of the love and all of the connections that people are holding on to in terms of lost ones, loved ones who passed during these times. And then thirdly, there was an exhibit that was just kind of Black artists from throughout the diaspora. And it was curated to kind of connect to the current times that we're living in. But there was some beautiful art there that I saw as well. So that was my
yeah.
last time being in a museum last weekend. Yeah.
Well, that's a good one to grace because yeah, I have missed the Brooklyn Museum. We were just reminiscing on one of the interviewees I was talking to about the first Saturdays and the fact that there were thousands of people that would show up, and that in COVID times, like some people they don't even understand what used to go down at the Brooklyn Museum. I mean, those numbers were crazy.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
really a good time, and it was always a lovely time, with community. So yeah, things are definitely changing.
Hopefully
But
we'll
yeah,
get
that's
back to
great.
that.
Huh?
I said, hopefully we'll get back to that.
Yes, we're crossing fingers. We're crossing fingers on that. So I guess one of the first questions I can ask you, specific to your experience and background, is if you could maybe share a little bit about how you've been over the years creating dedicated spaces for community building and connection with Brotherhood
Mm.
Sister Soul. So like you mentioned
Mm.
about the brownstone before and now with the new building, could you share a little bit about what that process was like for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think essentially what we try to do is to create um, intentional community. And by that, what we mean essentially is that the people who are involved kind of collectively determine how the space should function. And so all those who are involved have a voice, and all those who are involved have a part in the decision making with regards to that. And so when you think about the various programs that we run, whether that's our rites of passage program or our environmental program or our liberation program, in each of those programs, the young people kind of define for themselves kind of what's the mission statement look like. How do we define an environmentalist, or how do we define an organizer, or how do we define a leader? And so collectively coming together to kind of think about what are the ideals that we're striving for, what are things that we value, what are our objectives, and then how are we collectively going to support each other to achieve them. And so that happens, on lots of different levels, right? That happens in terms of our staff. And so this training that I just did, the new staff who've just come into our organization now have had to write their own mission statement, what
Mm,
they're collectively responsible for, and how they want to live as staff members within our organization, what they're striving to achieve. They had to create a definition of what it means to, we call our staff torchbearers, in essence,
mm,
the folks who are carrying the torch, forward, guiding
yeah,
guiding our young people. And so they had to define what it means to be a torchbearer. And they had to come up with a mission, an oath, a personal statement to the world, kind of who they are, what they want to achieve, and why they're doing this work. And so, again, an opportunity for folks to kind of self-define kind of what the community is going to look like. And so I think we've tried to do that on, the granular level in terms of the groups we create in terms of young people, try to do that amongst our staff. And then also in the physical manifestation of our buildings and spaces, that, these are places where we want them to feel open to community. We want people to feel as though they can take ownership to a certain degree of the space, that they love
right.
the space, that it cares for them, that it feels as though it's a home away from home. That it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like an institution, but more so a place where I go and I'm loved and I'm cared for, and I, hopefully want to spend a lot of time, and always want to be connected to, always see as a place, even when I get older, that I can call home and I can always go back to.
Yeah, no, that's amazing because that's exactly what the goal of the village is. They have been doing that in their own way for some time now, but in trying to think about how that translates into a dedicated space, like you said, like
Hmm.
into your building, and how people can take agency and ownership and feel like they belong, like that the space is for them.
Yeah.
And like you said, that it's a safe space, that they're loved there, and that they truly feel that.
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, it is, it's kind of easier said than done, right? So I guess
Mm.
maybe a follow-up question is, would you say you knew how to create that from the beginning? Like how to make community feel that way, how to make the folks that were participating in your programs and visiting your building, your space, the original one, and even the new one now. What was there a strategy, or was there kind of a method to your approach of how are we going to do this? How are we going to make folks feel this way? Because a lot
Mm.
of institutions and spaces try to do that, and have the intention to do so, but it doesn't always happen. It doesn't always come so
Yeah.
easy.
So, I mean, I think initially it just comes from upbringing, culture, right? Like, I come from a family where, when someone comes over, you treat them as family, welcome,
Right.
can I get you something, try to make sure they're comfortable. Um, and I think, whenever we have welcomed people, even when we were at Teachers College in the beginning and we didn't really have our own space, we just had a room, it was kind of like young people come in, it's a welcome, it's a hug, it's a let's sit down. Can I get you something? And it's, really trying to make people feel at home. And I think that comes from just cultural, that upbringing, like the idea that that's the way you treat people you care about. And I think
Right.
what has always been at the essence and the core of what we do is that we really care about people. And I think
Mhm.
that's sometimes a strange feeling. Like, a young person comes in, they don't know me from Adam, but as soon as they walk through the door, I've got a smile, I've got a hand out, what's up,
Mhm.
nice to meet you, what's your name, like. And so in part it was that feeling that came from whatever, us as founders, but also as we brought other people into the fold, it was always that same like mind state, right? Everybody who's
Right.
coming into this, you're coming into this because you love your community, because you love kids, because you want to see, folks uplifted. And so that energy is now being echoed and, by everybody in the space. And I think one of the things that you often hear young people who come through our organization talk about is just that feeling of walking in, at the time, the brownstone, or now here, or at this cornerstone is what folks are calling it, like that when they come in, they can feel that love. They can feel like people care about them. They can see it in your face. And, there are some things that are tangible and then there are some intangibles, right? You can't,
Yeah.
but it's a feeling. But also it's the way that you decorate the place, I mean, all
Mhm.
around the walls, we've always had the young people's art. We've always had messaging, pictures of ancestors, of leaders, of, artists, messages, quotes, proverbs, things that really speak to the richness of our heritage, our history, and also to the message of love, of struggle, of social justice, of freedom. So they're getting it, and people, young people, families, parents who come to our space are getting it from, the staff. They're getting it from the art and the kind of visual representation that they see on the walls. Um, and, they're experiencing kind of the message that we're trying to get across in many different ways.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it goes back to what you were saying at the top, was that the training that you're doing with your staff. I mean, I think that it says a lot, and it's very unique. I don't think it's a typical approach that each staff member has their own oath and their own kind of mission statement. And it's almost like they're going through their own rites of passage. And I think that that ritual of onboarding, because, some people call it onboarding, like new
Mhm.
staff, they get
Yeah.
onboarded, but,
Yep.
this is a very different nature of onboarding. And it's also about, like you said, like the integrity and the authenticity of your attitude and your expression towards others, like you said, in the way you greet them and treat them. So yeah, no, that's essential. That's like
Yeah.
that's and sometimes, like you said, those things can't always be taught. It's about who you are as a person. It's like a character thing. But yeah, I
Well,
really appreciate you sharing that.
yeah. And you, I mean, you said it exactly right. We're essentially asking our staff to go through the same kind of experience that we want, well, that we want our young people to go through, and so replicating that model, with our staff and not having any expectations for our youth that we don't have for ourselves.
Right, right. Like holding everybody accountable is a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. Yeah, wow. And your model has held up. Like that's a beautiful thing, is because I've seen, I remember being around from the very beginning, and you were very adamant about um the model for the programming, but also for your staff, and having that being replicated and being able to share that with others who want to do the same thing, which is
Mhm.
no doubt one of the reasons why you all are still doing so well and thriving today. So yeah, I can't wait to see what comes next. Um, so moving on to one of my next questions, it was because you mentioned that you naturally, part of your process was to speak to everyone involved. Everyone had a say, everyone had a part in the decision making process that kind of shaped what your spaces would be, the future building and whatnot. So do you remember maybe what were some of the essential elements or needs or tools that the youth or your staff mentioned, that they were saying like, hey, look, this is what we want to see, these are the things we need to have to make the space work for us? Do you remember some of the requests?
Yeah, I mean, So some of the things, it's been a while now since we've done this project, but I think some of the things that certainly came up were a feeling of comfort, right?
Mm,
And so how do you make a space feel comfortable? And so, places where people can lounge, where people can not feel like they're in an office,
mm,
but more so, you know, in a comfortable space. I mean, so that's one thing that comes up,
right.
that came up. I think another thing that came up was colors,
Mm,
and aesthetic,
mm-hmm.
and so the idea of earth tones, the idea of there is a certain kind of look to a New York City brownstone,
Right.
and I think in the early days when we were actually working out of a brownstone, the fact that it was a physical brownstone actually helped to create that feeling of a home. I mean, literally, it was a home
Right.
before we turned it into a community center. So we
Right.
had that aesthetic that was already there. I mean, there were fireplaces in the building. You know what I mean? Like
Right. No, I
there
remember it.
was,
Yeah.
all types of woodwork and mantelpieces and things of that sort that you wouldn't find in a community center, but you would
Right.
find in someone's home. And so those kind of things just add to this aesthetic of this not just being an institution, but this being a home of sorts. And so
Right.
I think to the extent that we've tried to, in the new building, utilize some of those same colors, we've taken out some of the uh, structural aspects of the building and included them into our new building that's much more modern. And there are aspects of our building that are very modern in their look
Right.
and their aesthetic, but it's combined with this kind of old school brownstone Harlem. Like when you think of Harlem and you think of Bed-Stuy, think Crown Heights, like there is a certain kind of brownstone living that is has a cultural history, and we've tried to
Right.
preserve some of that, within the structure of the building.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes perfect sense because like you said, I mean it literally was a home before. So that aesthetic, that feeling was built in. And so I imagine, like you said, even like you said, you preserved so much of the old building and embedded that within the walls of the new space to also bring that feeling back, which makes sense too. What about technology? Um,
Mm.
were there any requests in terms of like, oh, what kind of, because we're also talking about a space of the future, and I
Yeah.
know that I saw some early plans, some of your
Hmm.
fundraising materials and brochures had like, I guess, the renderings of the building, and it definitely has a futuristic look to it too in some ways.
For
And
sure.
so you think about technology and how that also aligns with what's happening inside and also how it's going to look on the outside. What kind of tech do you guys
Yeah.
have going on?
So let me address that, actually, the outside look, and then come back to the tech. I mean, we actually there was some debate about the outside look of the building. There are folks in Harlem who are very much about preservation and wanting to, keep the look of Harlem the same. And so the idea that this building on the outside did, look a bit futuristic, and it's definitely not your standard square box. There were some folks who had an issue with that, and I think
Right,
what we felt very strongly is that there was nothing wrong with our building sticking out and looking different, in some ways, while still maintaining some connection to the historic look. So, for example, it's not any higher than any of the buildings around it, which is something that
right.
a lot of folks sometimes have issues with if it's going to,
The height, right.
the height of it. And it also uses a kind of brown facade along with lots of windows so that light can come in, that kind of matches the color and the tone of buildings around it. But we did feel like this should be a beacon, right? This should be something that is attractive to young people, something
Mhm.
that does stick out in some ways and calls people's interest. And
Yeah,
so we didn't, in the end, and I think most people who we came in, are part of our community, felt like it was okay for it to look different and to stand out in that kind of a way. In terms of internal technology, I mean, we've got, state-of-the-art computer technology that is going to be in our tech spaces throughout the building. So, I mean, most of that is, related to computer technology and just all the latest computers software. We do a lot of digital filmmaking, digital photography, music making. So all the computers and things that we have, tech in the building will be enabling us to do that kind of work, right? So having the kids create their own films, having young people create music, as well as kind of digital art. We have an art studio, for traditional visual arts, painting, drawing, sculpting, but we also do arts through the tech as well.
Yeah,
At
well,
one point,
no, go ahead.
you may recall in the old building, we actually had a recording studio.
No, I do remember that.
And initially, that recording studio was actually a photography darkroom. And earlier on, we made the shift from black and white photography to essentially digital photography, and felt like with the limited space we had, a darkroom wasn't the best use. So that turned into the music studio. And so for many years we had a music recording studio. Nowadays, you can record music on your laptop, with a good microphone. You don't necessarily need even a formal studio to do it. So the folks who are involved at Brosis, who actually make music, were like, when we had to figure out, because even with all the space, we went from 4,000 square feet to this new building, 20,000 square feet. Even with the 20,000 square feet, we don't have enough space for everything that we wanted. So certain things, we had to make compromises. And so we decided not to go with a digital music making studio, but we still have the equipment that can be utilized in any room to record music. Yeah.
Right. So you kind of keep it mobile of sorts,
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's to your point, about how certain spaces become, I wouldn't say obsolete, but like you said, they don't become a priority, right? And just because of the way technology in the future is moving so fast and things are constantly changing, same thing, like you said, you don't need a dark room, you don't need necessarily a dedicated music studio, but yeah, so what does that mean for the future in terms of, we've been using this idea of future proofing, and future proofing is just, I guess, thinking about like, how do you plan and design for something to have sustainability beyond like constantly changing times, and changing interests too, because like, the youth, they're into stuff, 1 week and next week is something different. But so
let me just say one other thing that technology-wise, it's been really cool, and I'm excited to see where this goes, is we also purchased solar panels and a whole kind of solar energy capturing system. So it's it comes with a battery, and you can actually see the amount of energy that's being taken from the sun as the system is set up. And our environmental program, and it's portable. So it's a unit. We have 2 of these units now that can be set up, on your rooftop, or you can take them into a plaza and set them up there, and really using it as a teaching tool to teach young people about, solar power and ways in which we can get off of, the various forms of energy that are destroying our planet.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, that list goes on and on. No, for sure. I guess maybe going back to before, I mean, because now the building, and also too, just real quick, how long did it take from the time that you planned, like from the time you broke ground to cutting the ribbon, how long did it take for the building?
You mean the current headquarters?
Yeah, current headquarters.
Oh, well, we're going, into our 3rd year at this point. So I actually got to come back to you with the exact dates, but it's been about 2.5 years at this point.
Wow. That is, you mean, wait, 2.5 years from the time that you broke ground? Or that it's been up?
Yeah, don't quote me right now because I gotta go
Okay.
back and look at the actual dates, but it's definitely been over 2 years. Yeah, yeah, about 2.5 years, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, long process. We rented storefronts around the corner from our headquarters and have been operating in these storefronts for over 2 years now. In the
The village
process,
did
so
similar work
you
in storefronts. Storefronts seem to be really effective alternatives, like outposts for programming and
and
activities and all the things.
keep in mind that it wasn't just breaking ground and building the building. The first step was tearing down the old building.
Right.
So that in and of itself was a whole process. So tearing down the old building, digging out the whole foundation, and then starting the construction on the new building.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't have to go too deep into this, but I was just curious about um, like what considerations in like any field research did you lean into like when making decisions about the design of the building? Did you reach out to consultants? I mean, in addition to the community, right? That I know you said informed a lot of what the building ultimately became to be, but
I'm sorry,
because
can
you
you
talked
repeat the
about,
question?
yeah, so I'm thinking about like the field research um, around the design, like in terms of the construction and thinking about the expertise around that, right? I mean,
Hmm.
because it's one thing, because the community, and working with the community, everyone having their say and having their thoughts about what they want the space to be, but they're also not
Right,
coming from this place of expertise in terms of
right,
architecture and design,
right, right.
and so did you work like with specific folks from a firm or
Yes, yes. Yeah, so we've been fortunate in that so many years ago, you may recall this. I don't know. I worked with an organization called the Settlement Housing Fund. I don't know if that
mm,
was before we met, but um, they're an organization that literally builds housing for various constituents. When I was there, we were building housing for people living with AIDS.
mhm.
And then it has social services like on the ground floor and then housing on the upper floors. And through that work, I had met an architect who that company used, Tony Shatemi, a Black West African man who had started an architectural firm. And we used them when we were reforming the brownstone. So when we bought the brownstone, we had to do a whole gut rehab of that. And then they've actually been the firm that has done the entire architectural design and brought this new building to fruition.
Wow. Okay.
Tony
So you,
Shitsemi, yeah.
I know, and I didn't know about that. I think that was before we met because I didn't know about your background with the settlement housing group. But that's really interesting. Um,
Yeah, so his firm, has basically, the way I think a good architect works is they meet with you. We had lots of meetings with them and kind of similar questions that you've been asking me, like what's the what design elements do you want to see? What's the purpose of this building? What kind of activities are going to go on here? What kind of spaces do you want to have? We went through that whole kind of ideation
right,
process and they presented us with a design and we gave feedback and they edited the design and we kept going back and forth until we found a design that we actually really liked.
right, right. And we kind of already talked about this, but you mentioned some of the ways that you make the space inviting and make it feel um, accessible. Maybe accessible is the wrong word because I'm actually thinking about, because here's the thing, right? You have the Brosis community, your immediate community, that the youth that are taking part in your programs, right? But then because now that you have this larger building, how are you making the building, if you're making it accessible to the general public? Like when you have events or programs, like what are the ways
Hmm.
that you're kind of raising awareness about this kind of new phase of Bro Sis in this new building? And how are you making that building then maybe accessible to a larger community?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we're not in the building yet, so uh, some of these,
No, so no, I didn't
questions
realize
are
that.
speculative. No, we're still at the cornerstone. We're still around the corner in the
Okay.
storefronts. The hope is that, knock on wood, we'll be in there by February, by the end of the month. We, things have been delayed for a number of
Right,
reasons.
obviously,
The
yeah.
biggest one being COVID and, delays in the supply chain. But
Right.
now that we're in the middle of winter, there's lots of delays because of weather issues. And, COVID also caused a lot of problems in terms of, quarantining folks and folks getting
Yeah.
sick and workers not being able to work, and
Yeah.
all the things you can imagine, let
Right.
alone the normal kind of delays that always happen when you're building a building. So we had hoped we had been in the building by now, but we're not. That being said, to your question, it is something that we obviously think a lot about in terms of how staff, how members and how members' families and how the general community will, be able to access the building. And what are the ways in which we'll utilize the building to best support members, their families, and community. And I think, I don't know the extent this is similar to the village or not, but we actually have members. We have youth members who are formal members of our organization, and our programming is open to anyone in the community. But you have to become a member of the organization through participation in one of our programs.
Right.
So the main way that we, get young people to access our programming is through word of mouth, is through advertising in their schools, is, through making presentations, partnerships with schools and other CBOs. And that's the way young people and parents kind of find out about our organization
Right.
and send their kids. We do also have events that are open to the general community. And those happen at various times throughout the year. But our primary focus is serving the youth who are the members of our organization.
Right.
So most of
No,
our programming is geared towards them.
no, that makes a lot of sense. Next question, how have recent events from like the pandemic to the Black Lives Matter uprising, how have these things informed the way your space can or should function and serve the community in these kind of uncertain times, like, and that could be in reference to the safety of the building, the security of the building, the use of the building in terms of like,
Hello?
during, no, I'm sorry, I was thinking that
Okay.
in the time, like in Philly, right, when the BLM stuff, a lot of the things were happening, the village was really kind of at the center of that, being that they're right in the center of this North Philly neighborhood. And they became kind of like a hub for community members to work through things, and deal with things, confront things that were happening all around us, as far as like, sometimes it was conflict,
Yeah.
but have any of these things informed the actual design of the building? Or what your intentions are when things like this might happen in times of crisis?
Not so much in terms of the design. I'm sorry, Lee, I turned off my camera because I'm gonna start walking, but
No, that's
definitely
fine.
want to continue talking to you. So, so our young people in various ways have been, leading and participating in all different kinds of actions with regards to, the current realities that we're facing, right? Whether that's COVID or whether that's all of the issues, with regards to the Black Lives Matter movement and fair policing and police brutality and such. And so, that's been our work for a long period of time.
Mhm.
The ways in which we've kind of changed to try to address some of these issues. I mean, the biggest way has been, I think you've probably seen some of this, our food distribution efforts.
Right.
So, you know, just in response to the needs that we saw during the time of COVID, we have now, you know, over the last basically 2 years, given out almost 1 million, you know, food equivalent
Right.
to almost 1 million meals.
Right.
And that's been every single week over the last 2 years to about 400 to 450 families every week. So kind of just responding to the immediate needs that we saw within the community. Now, how did that, you know, how do we address that with our physical structure? I mean, it's been one of the challenges that we face because we don't at this point have a lot of physical space because we're in this temporary storefronts. So it's been a challenge for us to continue to provide that because every Wednesday when we do the food distribution, we basically use all of our space in our current storefronts, you know, to pack and to distribute this food out. So, you know, in our new space, we'll have lots more physical space so that we can
Right.
handle things of that sort. But
Right.
that's been one of the, you know, first things that comes to my mind is in terms of addressing the immediate kind of COVID situation. You know, the challenge that we've faced also is just because our spaces are smaller, you know, how do you deal with being able to continue to support young people in person?
Right.
Because we did go virtual for a period of time, but, you know, that's not the best way to support youth development.
No.
It's,
No.
you can do it, you know, and depending on the circumstances, occasionally that's a beneficial way to do things, but on the week to week, you know, some social emotional supports that, you know, we provide to our young people, we found that, you know, the virtual, we did out of necessity and did the best we could, but we wanted to get back to being in person as quickly as we could. And so fortunately our staff, although dealing with all these issues with regards to the pandemic, is willing to make that happen.
No, I hear you. And this last question, because I know you're on the move now and I want to wrap up. We're almost done here. I just
Well, I
wanted
can
to,
talk, so don't worry about, I mean, I'm
oh,
walking
okay.
home, so I
Okay.
don't need to, I mean, it's whatever we need in terms of time.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So, but we're still getting close to the end. The next question was really kind of going to, it relates to that, like this idea of dealing with the pandemic, dealing with so much loss and grief, and
Mm,
conflict and violence, right? Do you have a dedicated space for, like, a dedicated sacred space, right?
mm,
It's interesting because you talked about your experience at the Brooklyn Museum and how that artist kind of did these sand paintings for those that were
mm,
lost, and you know, and how important it is to hold space for those that we've lost and our ancestors, you know.
mhm, mhm.
And so thinking about that, I know that that's always been something that's important to Brosis, and wondering how you and the youth and your staff and everyone have thought about how you would make space for that in the new building.
Yeah, good question. We, you know, we have made space for that in a few different ways. So one is, you know, I mentioned the garden. There's a 6,000 square foot garden adjacent to our building. And all along the fence of the garden, there's a section for our ancestors.
Mm,
So there, anybody from the community who has lost someone is able to basically we laminate a picture of that person onto a wooden background, and that enables it to be permanent on the fence. So this is just an opportunity to have, you know, an image of your loved one that is, you know, there at the garden, and becomes, you know, something that your family and your friends, you know, can pass by in remembrance.
yeah.
And there's also an ancestral part of the garden, which is more for, you know, folks who have led social justice movements or been leaders in social justice movements and things. that we have there as well. So we have two different spaces. Like one is the more personal, and the other is more, from a kind of revolutionary leader perspective.
Yeah.
So those are just two like really kind of physical aspects. In addition to that, inside the building, we have what's called the mind, body, and spirit room. And that has always been a space. In the brownstone, we had a mind, body, spirit room. And that was a space that was dedicated to the arts. But the idea was it was also a space of healing, right?
Mm.
So using the arts for healing, whether that was, physical, like visual arts, painting, drawing, but also, meditation, yoga, kind of wellness activities of those sorts.
Right.
And we have a whole room, a space that's been dedicated to that in the new building as well, and was funded in part by Rachel Cowan, who is a board member of ours, who really pushed the idea of wellness and mindfulness within our organization. And so there's a beautiful room with hardwood floors and open to the southern sun that can be used for any of those kind of wellness activities. So it's one of the, emphasis, one of the things we're emphasizing as we grow as an organization. So as we move into the new brownstone, the new headquarters, no longer the brownstone, we are holding on to the storefronts. And the storefronts are going to become our college, career, and wellness center.
Oh, wow.
And so the storefronts will be transformed slightly. And that will be the space where any of our members who are, going off to college or in the process of preparing for that, or are looking for work or trying to, take the next step in their career, will be able to utilize those spaces. That's where the staff will be. But also our wellness team, and these are folks who really are focusing in on how do we deal with healing? How do we deal with trauma in our community? How do we help young people to develop skills and ways of being that help them to stay balanced, in these difficult times, to deal with the challenges that they face? And we've expanded our staff to hire 2 full-time social workers who are going to be providing mental health support within our organization. We've been always providing that over the years, but usually it's been referring people out to our partners. So now we'll have that in-house. So really, the expanded space then allows us to have rooms that are dedicated to that, and rooms that are beautiful and calming and peaceful. And
Yeah.
they went through a whole process of choosing what are the colors that they want, what kind of rugs that they want, what kind of pillows and other things of that sort, to make the space feel safe, feel
Right.
warm, and feel inviting for that kind of work.
Right. Right. No, it's amazing. It sounds so beautiful. And one of the things you were talking about, how you expanded your staff, and that was actually one of the final questions, was about, what do you think, if you had to have like essential core staff, or any kind of new positions of the future, right? Like maybe not so much a core staff, because you've already kind of been there, done that, and you have a pretty robust staff, I'm sure, at this point. But if you could think about any new positions or roles that may have emerged as a result of new needs and maybe even future interests of the community that you're serving, of the youth, or even just like what's going on in the world. Like you said, like the social workers or even mental health workers, like you said, has kind of always been a part of what you offer. But do you envision or foresee any other types of roles and responsibilities that you maybe have yet to assign, but think you might need in the future? And this is one of those speculative questions,
Yeah. I think one that we're, an expansion that we're currently hiring for is an environmental justice organizer. We've done a lot around environmental education with our young people, but our organizing work has been more around the areas of education and fair policing and kind of reduction of the marijuana laws, things of that sort. So this has been, obviously we are in a time now where the future of our world, our planet and all life on it is in jeopardy. And I think for a lot of us who have been organizers and activists, for decades, I know when I first got into it, I used to, think that environmental justice organizers were just white folks who cared more about whales than they cared about people. And it was more of a, I was more interested in, what was happening on a day-to-day basis, the reality of the folks in my community. But I think for all of us, we've had to come to the, realization and awareness that if we don't take care of our planet, the neighborhoods we're fighting for ain't gonna be here anymore. The communities that we're fighting for ain't gonna be anymore. So how are we incorporating that into everything that we do? And thinking about, as they say, our carbon footprint, thinking about how are we recycling, are we composting? Are we supporting green spaces? Are we using alternative energy? Are we fighting to ensure that the corporations and the government that unfortunately is heavily influenced by the corporations is doing right by us in terms of the laws and regulations that, guide our lives? So I just think that, in anything we're building, that certainly needs to be a part of the conversation is, to what extent is this a green structure? To what extent, are the materials that are being used, helping or, causing detriment, to our communities and their usage, moving forward? How are we thinking about, there's something that we've been talking about now as well, is that, with our new building, we have this beautiful kitchen and cooking facilities. And so we're going to be producing a lot of organic waste. And how are we going to be, we already have a composting system that we utilize, but, it's not going to be able to handle all the organic waste that we're going to produce. So just making sure we got our partnerships in place so that for educating our kids about these issues, we have to, as an organization, be able to demonstrate, how things should be done and not just talk about them abstractly.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're definitely preaching to the choir on the environmental bit and the idea of like just the crisis, the urgency we're in when it comes to this planet and its future, and how things are, they require balance very quickly, or, we're going to be dealing with, like you said, we can't fight for our neighborhoods if they're underwater. We can't fight for our neighborhoods if, the planet is burning. Like we have to really get in gear with that. And that actually kind of, I guess, brings me to the last question, I have for you, is the one I've been asking everyone. I don't know what films you've watched lately or what films you can recall at the moment, but if you can think about for a minute the science fiction or fantasy films in your mind's eye, the worlds and the universes that are often depicted in these fictional stories depict a Earth, a planet, our cities in the future. And they look different. Sometimes they're technological, really advanced, very sleek, very digital. Sometimes they're very dry and desolate, like a wasteland, Sometimes they could be dealing with water and flooding and things like that. So, of course, and there's always situations where, we think about Octavia Butler and Parable of the Sower, and a lot of people gravitated towards that text because of how close it seemed to be to our world today. And she wrote that, you know, how many decades ago, and it's really resonating with folks now. And we're trying to think about, well, what will the future look like? And then, I mean, can you imagine your space even? Think about your space in New York and the new building, and 30 years from now, what that intersection will look like in Manhattan. What, you know, how are you equipped for what that future will hold? And basically the question is, what film, right? Of all the films you can think of, is there a film that you think comes close to the world that we might likely see?
That's an interesting question. It's funny because I just saw I think it's called Gang of Thieves, which
Oh, I don't know
is
that one.
it's
Is
a
that zombies?
precursor to it's not well it's a precursor to this other film which is called, I forget, Gang of something else, that is a zombie movie. And so this one is about this guy who knows how to unlock any safe, and he has all these skills, and so he unlocks all these safes and goes on this whole adventure with this team of people who are trying to just make all these robberies. But anyway, yeah, there is a zombie apocalypse film that's the sequel to this one. You know, honestly, I don't know. I probably was thinking, yeah, we got some gun turrets and a helicopter launch pad on the rooftop. You know, we're ready. But
Wait, do you have a helicopter launch pad on the top?
Yeah.
No, you do not.
No, we do not. No, we do not.
Oh, I thought you.
I'm saying, like, you know, I mean,
Oh,
you
I
know,
was about to be super hype. I was like, look, I was ready.
We haven't, you know, we haven't thought that far. I'll be honest. Like, it's just part of this is you know, our vision has always been kind of one, freeing the land, right? That we own this piece of land, that no one can come and take it from us. You know, that we have the power to build our community, you know, on this land. I mean, we talk about Parable the Sower, you know, so much of that was about her finding a place where she could build her community, right? And that, you know, developing her philosophy on life and on spirituality and God is change, and then building a community of people who could live together, support each other in the midst of an apocalypse, you know, but try to create some level of humanity amongst themselves. And I think that's what we're doing. You know, we're building a community in this space that we have that has an ideology that is based in love, based in caring for one another, based in, you know, mutual support and unity, and trying to make it work to the best we can. And
Yeah.
you know, connecting people who have like minds to be a part of it. And you know, what does that mean in terms of the future and where we're going? You know, it's hard to say, because unfortunately we got people who, with the press of a fucking button, excuse my language, I know this is being, you know, could destroy everything. And then what? You
And
know,
then
like,
what?
so I think, you know, we kind of have to, you know, cross that bridge if we get there. But for now, try as best we can to keep them kind of people away from the button.
Right.
You know, and to, you know, to a certain degree, building a community of folks who are awake and woke, and like understand the realities that we're living in, and
Yeah.
haven't, you know, fallen into, you know, the ignorance of accepting the status quo. You know, so much of our work is just about that. So, you know, my goal, if one of the things that I think we need to do in the future, and you know, this ties in directly with Octavia Butler, I want to have land upstate. I want to have land somewhere where we can, our own land that we can get
Right.
away to. And, the organizations like Wild Seed, what they were doing there, and
Right. And
there are others,
Soulfire and Capilio.
Soulfire, exactly. Like, and Kite's Nest, and, folks who are finding, more rural, more woodland, more, off the grid places
Desert
where,
even. Folks going out to Joshua
communities,
Tree.
yeah. In part, it's, okay, where can we go when the crap hits the fan? And part of it is, where can we go just to learn the skills that are necessary to
Yeah.
live off the land, so that if this were to happen, it's not to do this just because there's a possibility of, a horrible future, but also because these skills are skills that humans need. Like, it's part of
And
being an
skills we
animal
had
on this
before.
planet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
our ancestors and indigenous peoples had these skills long ago. So it's not so
yeah,
much that, and life was good then. It wasn't like they had these skills because they were in crisis. They knew those
right,
things because they were connected to the land, and that was just the way of life,
right. And I
But no,
think,
I hear you on that.
yeah, to me, it's about being more fully human. And that I think we oftentimes forget that we are mammals just like any other mammal. And we depend on the earth. And to a certain degree, we evolved over millions of years to live off the earth. And it's only been in the last, whatever, few hundred, that we have really taken this total turn towards everything we eat, everything we ingest, everything we use being kind of manufactured in some kind of factory, and devoid of its, all connection to, what is natural. And that, to me, having a place where you can go and be in the woods and kind of reconnect, spiritually, physically, health wise, to the earth, is a critical next step. And we do that every year with the kids. We bring them to these places, but we don't own the place. We rent it out for a weekend, and,
Right.
or what have you. But either in partnership with another organization, or having it in our own right, something that provides that kind of an opportunity.
No, for sure. But I know that I was just thinking about something, and it warmed my heart because I was just realizing, like, oh, you know what? You were some like 22 years ago. Now that I think about it, you were the first one to give me my first copy of Parable of the Sower. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, I didn't remember that. No, but okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you gave me my first copy, like, now that I think about it. And yeah, I mean, that book changed my life in so many ways. And I teach it now in class, at the university, at some of the colleges where I teach. I've been teaching courses around that book. And and this is actually when the pandemic hit. I was teaching Parable of the Sower at Moore College of Art and Design. And then we went virtual. We were waiting for the news, to see. That was when, Corona was still in China, it hadn't made its way to the US yet. And then sure enough, it did. And the rest is history. But yeah,
Yes.
it's mind blowing, but that's it. That's one future. It doesn't have to be our future.
Right.
Let's just hope it doesn't go further down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I mean, this has been great. You've given me such, and I think, such great insights. But I think that, it's really great to have someone from your field, from someone who's an executive director, a founder of, your organization is just, such a great parallel, I think, with the village and where it's going, with the space that they're building and the ones that they already have. Like you said, it's a full campus. They have a lot going on. It's been going on for a while, 30 plus years, but it's a new era now. And There's a lot of things a lot of good things are gonna come, you know? And I hope I get to get a tour. Like I'm trying to get a tour when you, so you think you're gonna be in the building at the end of February. I think
That's
when
the
the
hope.
weather breaks, yeah, that's the hope. I'm gonna cross fingers for all y'all. And I just have, you know, so much congrats, and you know, I'm so many prayers going up for all y'all, and blessings, and all, you know, I just wish you all the best in your new building. And I know you've come so far, and like in the fundraising and just everything to get to where you're at. It's remarkable. It's really remarkable, and it's amazing because I remember when you were talking about, hey, I want to do this thing, brotherhood, sister, soul, and here you are, you know, all these years later and doing amazing, amazing things. So thank you for making the time, you know, I really appreciate it. As far as a follow-up, I'm gonna send you an email. If you've got a 2022 W-9, please send it my way. We don't need an invoice or anything. And what we're gonna do is once I finish the last interview, then they're gonna process all the interviews at one time. So you're kind of lucky because you came at the end. Some of the folks I did last week have been waiting a little bit longer, but we're gonna process the checks once I get all the first round interviews done. And then what else? And then also too, if you have any thoughts about anyone else like in New York, because again, we're kind of reaching out. This first round was reaching out to folks I knew because it was like post the holiday, starting the new year. And I wanted to, you know, do this first round with folks that I was familiar with, who I thought I would get an easy yes from. So thank you for agreeing to this. But then the second round, you know, we're also asking folks to share any recommendations of anyone who you think, you know, might have had a similar experience with building a building, who might have any experience or connection to land-based initiatives, because the village also has a garden and is thinking more about those things and how to expand that. But then also too, around futurism, survivalism, who knows? And then what's the last thing? Yeah, like I said, I'll be hitting you up because I would love to bring even maybe the ED, Aviva Kapust, and Jeanette. Jeanette is, I don't know why you would know Jeanette, but anyway, it's a small crew of folks that are working on this project, and maybe we can make a trip to New York and see the facility, see the new building, and all its glory when you're ready to receive us. Of course, you got to get settled in, but
yeah. Well, you know,
yeah,
one person or one institution that comes to mind right away. Do you know Lumumba Bandeli?
From Malcolm X grassroots movement?
Yeah.
I only know him through, what was his wife's name? Or is it still his wife?
Monifa.
Yeah, Monifa. Yeah. I remember Monifa.
Okay, well, Lumumba is on the board of the Caribbean Cultural Center. And, you know, Martha Vega?
Yes, I remember her.
So she was the founder, I think, of the Caribbean Culture Center, the ED, for many years. You know, she's a very well-known person in the art, in the Afro art world, Afro Latinx art world.
Oh, that's a great example.
And I mean, we know her, I know her, but I know better. I mean, I could probably find her information. But one of our alumni is either the new ED, or one of our alumni's mother, I should say, is either the new ED or the new AED.
Of the Cultural Center?
Yeah, and they went through, you know, they bought a building in Harlem, an old firehouse, and turned it into, you know, their new headquarters a few years back. So it might be an interesting group to think about, to talk to. Some of these questions, I imagine, were things they had to think through as they were transforming this old firehouse into, you know, a museum.
No, that's great. And, you made me also think of Lori Cumbo, even though I know she's moved on, but her early, you know, work with Mo Kata and everything. She might be someone to talk to as well. But yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. I really do. And I'm gonna, I'm stopping the recording.